Hi there, Karen Fabian here. I'm so glad you're watching this video. This is one of the most important topics that people just don't really talk about. And when I say it's an important topic, what I mean is it is one of the keys. I'd almost dare say it's the key to truly confident teaching where you're really making a positive impact on your students. And it sort of sounds obvious, but so many yoga teachers are not doing this. And I'm just going to outright say what it is. It's watching your students as they move on the mat. So just think about that logically. You go into a room with a bunch of people you don't know, maybe you know a couple of them, maybe you don't, and then you start practicing yoga. And a lot of the poses you're doing, you can't see them. For instance, if you're in downward facing dog, you're looking at the floor. And so as they're in downward dog, you can't see them. And instead of that, even for poses where you are upright, you're probably facing sideways. So you still can't see them, because this is what so many yoga teachers do. They practice with their class, and when they practice with their class, they turn their mat sideways so as to help the students see the alignment of the pose rather than seeing the teacher head on. So I get the intention, but the entire process is based on a flawed belief that your students need to see you in order to know what to do. And I'm going to get to that in a second, but I want to just call that out. That's probably one of the reasons why you're practicing with your class. Now, the other reason might be, there's two other reasons, and it might be a blend of all three. It might be that's how you remember what comes next in your sequence by doing it. And it might also be the source of your cues. Practicing with your class might actually be how you know what to say, because you feel it in your body, and that's the catalyst to what you're saying. I get it. What I want you to take a moment to just imagine, and I'm not trying to convince you, because there's no right or wrong here. You can teach however you want. I just want to share this with you because so many teachers don't even think this is an option for them. And they're simply practicing with their class, becoming dependent on practicing so that they know what to say and they know what comes next in the sequence. And they build this habit of doing it. And they don't at any point have a choice. They've created a dependency. And let me tell you something else. You're also creating a dependency on the student's part. The students now depend on you to do the sequence. And if you don't believe me, just stop practicing with your class, and pretty soon you're going to see them in downward dog lifting their head like, why are you not doing it with us? I've been coming to your class for months and you always practice with us. So I'm going to get to that in a minute, because part of what is required here is to loosen the dependency that your students have on you to practice with them. So again, you can do whatever you want. What I want you to imagine, though, is what is possible for you as a yoga teacher when you loosen your attachment to practicing with your class. I said it at the beginning. What is available to you is one of the most powerful things that as a yoga teacher you can have access to, which is looking at how your students are doing. I always say the cue and see what they do. Say the cue and see what they do. When you say the cue and then can see what they do, that's how you know if your cues are working. How can you possibly know if your cues are working if you're practicing with your class? You cannot. Because our students are not talking back to us as they're going through the practice, the only way that you know if it's working is by looking at them. So I want you to imagine having the confidence and the courage and the skill to do the walk and talk instead of the practice with me approach, to walk around the room, to not even need to put a mat down, and to see how your cues are landing on your students. In doing that, you will have so many light bulb moments where you're motivated and inspired to change the cue that you just shared so that it can really meet the moment of what a student or a group of students or the whole class needs. And in that moment of you doing that, your students are going to feel seen more than they have ever felt before, because now you're speaking right to them. And I don't necessarily mean calling out, hey, Joe, can you stack your knee over your heel? I don't actually prefer that approach. You can do whatever you want. It's just, I think it takes people out of their practice when they hear their name. It's like when you were in school and your teacher might have said, hey, Sally, can you sit down? It's very jolting to the nervous system. The point is, when you start to change your cues and have it be a little more dynamic and based upon what you're seeing, your students will feel seen. And when they just see that you're walking around the room, they'll know that you're watching them. If they wanted to watch you practice, they could have stayed home and done a damn video. So this is why amazing teachers do the walk and talk, because they are standing out from all the other teachers who are just practicing with their students. Now, again, I have to emphasize, if you love practicing with your class, do it. The thing is, though, I want you to really be honest with yourself about what is causing you to practice with your class. And if it's because you're not, that's how you remember your sequence, that's how you know what to say, or you have this belief that your students need you to practice with them, I encourage you to take a moment to ask yourself, wow, are these facts or are these just beliefs? And is it possible for me to learn how to teach by doing the walk and talk? To not have to depend on my practice to know what to say and to know what comes next in the sequence. And here's the other amazing thing. When you break up with your practice as the source of your cueing and sequencing, you get your practice back. Now you can practice and it doesn't have to be intertwined with you teaching. Remember when you had that life, when you just practiced for practice, when you weren't a teacher and you had your ritual around what class you went to and what you put around your mat and the props and now you're teaching and all of a sudden you're practicing in your teaching classes. And then when are you ever practicing? Everything gets all intertwined. You as a teacher is a different part than you as a student. And unfortunately, for a lot of yoga teachers, they've blended the two. They've gone into class and they go into class and they teach as a practitioner by practicing with their class. Now, here's one more thing before I give you the how to do the walk and talk part of this conversation. I mentioned earlier that you might believe, many yoga teachers believe, because they tell me this belief, my students need me to practice with them. I cannot emphasize enough how much of a belief this is. This is not a fact. And if you don't believe me, start experimenting with doing the walk and talk. Get really good at sharing clear cues. And pretty quickly, you're going to notice that no one needs you to practice with them. It's that you needed to practice with them as the source of your cues or the source of knowing what comes next in your sequence, or maybe you're afraid to let your students see you. This is a common thing. We don't have to be afraid to bring up the fact that maybe it's a little scary to stand in front of the room and have all these eyes on us. Maybe we feel a little imposter syndrome. Maybe we get nervous. Maybe we're, considering ourselves not expert enough or whatever. Maybe there's this pressure to do it perfectly. These are all things that can move teachers to just hide on the yoga mat. If I'm doing my own practice, I don't have to face the class. I don't have to let them see me. This is a lot of the deep inner work that I do with teachers when I work with them in my program. And it's work that people are not getting any other place. But it is absolutely, I'm convinced over years and years of training teachers in these techniques, the path to confident, empowered teaching, where it is easy, where you walk into the room, you don't even need to put a mat down. You have no notes. You're not freaking out about eyes being on you. You are standing there an empowered, powerful, confident teacher and just teaching the class. So with that, let me go to the whiteboard. I'm going to write down how you can get started doing this. So it doesn't really matter if you can't see the whiteboard clearly. I sort of just do it for a fact, but the idea here is how to do the walk and talk. All right, so I'm going to assume that you're already teaching and you've been practicing with your class as your methodology. So there's really two ways of approaching it. You can do the practice with me approach, or you can do the walk and talk, or you can be sort of a hybrid in the middle. I'm going to assume that you right now are doing primarily the practice with me approach, and you want to do the walk and talk, or you're curious about how would I actually start to shift from being the kind of teacher who does the practice with me approach to being a teacher who does the walk and talk. So here's how you're going to do it. Number one, we have to talk about mat placement, because I'm not going to suggest that you go in tomorrow and immediately try to just stand up on your feet and not practice with them. That's unrealistic. We need to transition you from the practice with me approach to the walk and talk approach. So the first thing I'm going to recommend is, instead of having your mat sideways to them, perpendicular to them, turn your mat so it's facing them. Because now you're in a better position to see them, they're in a better position to hear you. That's another thing we haven't talked about. How much clearer your voice will be, how much better you will project your voice because you are standing up. Even from a nervous system regulation standpoint, you will be so much calmer teaching, standing upright and feeling your feet flat on the floor, instead of moving around and doing the practice and getting out of breath. That affects not only your vocal quality, but your nervous system, your heart rate, all of it. So the first thing we want to do is have you turn your mat, just like my mat is here, facing the class. The next thing I want you to experiment with is to start on your feet. Start on your feet. Whatever pose you start them in, you start on your feet. And see how long you can stay there. Now I'll give you a related tip. It's to start them in a pose where they're floor facing, meaning where they are facing the floor. Now this of course depends on your sequence. The idea though is, if you start them in something like child's pose, or laying on the back looking up to the ceiling, or in downward facing dog, something where they're not looking right at you. This is a great way to start to deal with the nervous knots in your stomach, if that's something that is coming up for you when you think about doing the walk and talk. Because if you come into the room, your mat is now facing forward, you've got this idea in your head, I'm going to see how long I can stay on my feet. The first couple of moments of your class are critical, where you want to start getting into that present and calm feeling your feet on the floor, taking a couple deep breaths. And it's much easier to do that if no one's looking right at you. So if you can start your students in something where they're not looking right at you, that's a great additional thing to add in. Now, the idea with this is, you're going to see how long can I stay on my feet and teach. And if you find, and this is going to happen, if you find you need to go back to practicing with them, that's okay. You're driving the car. You're making the executive decision that that's something you need to do. However, at the end of class, this is really important. I want you to make note of what caused you to go back into practicing with them. This transition will only work to get you from the practice with me approach to the walk and talk approach if you do this post-class assessment. It will not work if you just go home and beat yourself up and say to yourself, I'm a bad teacher, I went in with the intention of staying on my feet, and 20 minutes in, I ended up practicing with them, I'm never going to be able to do it. That's not helpful. What I want you to do is, you're on your feet, you're on your feet, you're on your feet, and then all of a sudden something happens that causes you to go back onto your mat and practice with them. What was that thing? What most teachers tell me is they get nervous, they feel self-conscious, they forget what comes next in the sequence, they forget what cues to use. You must identify what was the catalyst to you jumping back into practice. Maybe you saw some people were confused and you thought it was just easier to do the pose with them rather than refining your cues so that they knew what to do. So the reason I want you to identify this is because That's an identifier of a problem we need to fix. Because if the reason you're constantly going back into practice with them, for instance, is that you keep forgetting where you are in the sequence, then guess what? We need to get you a signature sequence that you teach over and over and over and over again. And I bet if you and I were having a conversation, you would probably say to me, I'm changing my sequence every week. And I would say to you, what is the catalyst for you doing that? And you'd probably say to me, well, I'm doing it because I think my students will get bored if I don't change my sequence every week. And that, my friend, is another belief. If you want to break the dependency you have on practicing with your class, you must start to loosen your attachment to these beliefs. And one of the beliefs that is out there, many teachers have it, is that they need to change their sequence all the time or their students will get bored. Or their students need variety. Of course, the students need variety. It's just a myth. It's just a story. And all these stories and beliefs do is continue to perpetuate teachers teaching in a way that is not a match for how they want to teach. So if you are watching this and you truly want to do the walk and talk, now is the time to start to face these beliefs and simply ask yourself, could I just experiment with something different and just see what happens? So in this case, could I just experiment with teaching the same sequence 3, 4, 5 classes in a row and see how much longer I can stay on my feet? Maybe the next time I go back on the mat here. Maybe the next time I go back on the mat here. And then, oh my God, after like 6 weeks, I'm completely walking around. This is what I mean when I talk to teachers about, it's not about how many hours of training you have. Teachers tell me they have 500 hours of training and they're still practicing with their class and they have no idea how to break up with their practice as the source of their teaching. The hours is not the answer. In many cases, it's the beliefs that you have that are blocking you from being the kind of yoga teacher you dream of being. And the only way to break these beliefs, in addition to working with someone like me who has the skills from a coaching perspective to help you pull these beliefs to the surface, the only other way, or the additional piece of it, is to experiment with different things in your classes. And believe me, when I talk about me as a coach, the reason I bring that up is because beliefs are very difficult to change on one's own. If you have a belief, you have the belief. And until you talk to somebody else, someone like me who calls you out on that belief and says, hey, is that actually true? You'll just keep believing that thing. And the problem in the yoga industry is so many teachers have these similar beliefs that if you're the kind of teacher who wants to do the walk and talk, but every time you go take a class, the person's practicing with the class, that just reinforces the belief that that's what you have to do. And I am here to tell you, you don't have to do anything that doesn't match up with what you want to do. But it really takes a strong and empowered and courageous teacher to start to move through those beliefs and really own and give themselves permission to teach how they want to teach in service to loving teaching and ultimately in service to being the best teacher you can be, which only helps your students more. That's really what we're talking about here. Being the kind of teacher who does the walk and talk. It's only logical that you're going to be more helpful to your students because you can see how they're doing. It does require amazing cueing skills. It does require that you have a good, solid understanding of anatomy. It does require that you know your sequence really well. These are all things I can help you with. But in this brief video, I wanted to give you the step-by-step to at least get you started with doing the walk and talk. So I'm going to wrap this one up now. I think this was probably pretty thought-provoking, right? So I want you to feel free to send me an email, Karen@barebonesyoga.com, or send me a direct message on Instagram, Barebones Yoga. Let me know any questions you have and let me know what help you need to make this happen for you. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next video.